Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt.
And I'm Jadrian.
Thrilled to be here with you this afternoon. How are you doing today, Jadrian?
It's been a very long day. We are recording this the Monday after the big bank run. And so as two economists, even though we're not macroeconomists, I'm going to speak for you, Matt. I spent like the entire weekend watching this, seeing what's happening, learning about the FDIC. So I'm a little tired, but tired in a good way.
Yeah, I probably spent way less time than most, and I know I spent less time than you. I didn't come up with a writing. For the audience, we talked a little bit about should we do this on the bank run and what just happened. Our fear is by the time this comes out, there'll be 14 new revelations that make this outdated, and so we decided against it. But it is pretty fascinating to see it happening, right? I don't know, the stakes are high, so it's fascinating. Might not share the concern for those who are losing deposits, but from a perspective, right? You teach bank runs, and then to see it happen is interesting.
You know what this reminded me of? I think we talked about this maybe before in a previous episode, but during the pandemic in that, I think April or May, I was teaching classes and like in the moment, you're like, we're in a recession. I think it was our recession episode, we're like,
yes,
it's not officially a recession yet, but like, it's a recession. And so I think it's just very weird to be like in the moment observing something that you teach about and then realizing like, oh, we just got to give this enough time and this will get in our textbooks. And then, if I ever have to teach principles of macro, I'm gonna be like, I remember where I was during the bank run of 2023. It's neat from an academic, historical perspective, especially as an econ lover. But I feel for the people who are going through the stress related to all of that.
Yeah, and I've often thought one way, if you're an individual, and I'm not in this spot, but one key thing for diversification is don't ever have more than $250,000 in any given bank, right? But I mean, institutions, a lot of them don't have it. They can't have 100 different bank accounts.
There are companies that'll do it for you.
Okay. Well, then maybe
there are companies that'll split up your bank accounts so that you don't do it.
Now, if the Federal Reserve, if the U.S. government's just going to keep insuring no matter what, which at the current moment, and once again, this could be outdated by the time people see it. At the currently, it appears the U.S. government will be doing that. Then maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah. We will see. So if this comes out in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we'll be able to look back at this and say, well, let's see what's changed. Yep. We have a recording of what has happened over the 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So Matt, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking something I've never tried before, I don't think. And I don't even have my phone here, so I can't check. Hazy Bones, Hazy IPA. It is from Flying Fish.
I have a hazy IPA downstairs. I should have got that one instead.
How about yourself? What are you drinking?
It is called the Majestic Mullet Crispy Kolsch by Parkway Brewery. And since I've only been drinking Virginia beers on this show, Salem, Virginia. So I made sure to relatively local.
This is a New Jersey beer, which a lot of our
Fish is good
from New Jersey. Flying Fish, it's a good company.
Good beer.
So, well, cheers before we start. So,
cheers. I got my. There you go. I'm drinking today out of my what am I? The Stone Buena Vesa Salt and Lime Lager. So I think I've told you this before. I collect pint glasses. I collected pint glasses until I got too many pint glasses, and I got to stop collecting pint glasses. That's also how I collect coffee cups for a while. Yeah. But what's fun is I remember where I get all of my my glasses. I have sweet memories tied to this. It was the AEA that was in San Diego 4 years ago, 2019. I went drinking with Doug Norton, who's at Florida State, and Mike Coons, who's at Tampa. And we just did our own little bar crawl around San Diego until our flights left. So we went to the Stone Brewery, and I loved this logo so much. I was like, I'm going to get this pint glass.
So it's March when we're recording this, and it will drop on the Sweet 16 round of the NCAA men's basketball tournament on the Thursday of the Sweet 16 round. So we decided let's talk a little bit about the economic implications of the name, image, likeness, NIL rules for college sports. And Jadrian, I know that you have taught sports economics, so the idea of paying athletes for many years is, I'm sure, something you taught about, like, and it didn't happen. And now there's this switch where it's not really being paid by the universities, but almost kind of. And then people can raise money. So do you want to give a little bit of a description of what the NIL allows, first of all, for those who might not know?
And I'll tell you how much I love this, as because so I'm teaching sports econ for the first time now. The last time I taught it was almost a decade ago, like 9 years ago. And I absolutely love seeing my notes from 9 years ago versus my notes today. Like, I had a whole chapter on should college athletes be paid. Like, I have videos about, about name, image, likeness when it was coming up, because it was before like the O'Bannon lawsuit and all sorts of stuff. So now that I'm actually here, it's really fun. So, okay. Paying college athletes is very interesting because I think it depends on who you talk to. So name, image, likeness is essentially that athletes at universities can get paid for their name, image, or anything that looks like them. But there are some caveats on that. So, I can, like, if I was a student athlete, I could represent my local car dealer, and they could say, Jadrian Wooten is a professor, come on down and come buy a car, the Jadrian Wooten special. They can do that. I could sell my name to them, but I couldn't sell my name attached to the university. And that's where it gets really interesting. So there are a lot of limits on name, image, likeness. So a student athlete can't advertise with their school jersey on for the car dealership. They can advertise like in the same colors where it looks like it, but they can't have like the university name across the front. So athletes can kind of get paid. The big things, it's the big athletes, they're getting paid for autographs now. So if they want to pay somebody to do a signing thing, you're a big quarterback somewhere, you can sign stuff. A lot of smaller, I don't want to say smaller athletes, but athletes that are not as prominent, they're getting kind of local deals, hometown deals. But it's, it's a step in the right direction. But the hard part is you have, as the NCAA, you have to kind of monitor it, and they've never been good at that sort of stuff. So there's still a lot of weirdness around it.
Yeah, it's still reasonably new, and then with COVID, I think a lot of people are figuring it out. The other thing I understand is with NIL, it opens up the doors on other sources of income. So you have, I know there's a gymnast who has a massive influencer following, and is able to earn money based on that wasn't, basically not restricted from earning money like before. And then great. It seems like there are cases where donors for schools essentially says, if you come here, you will get this we will give you this NIL deal.
Yeah, so that's where the legislation and the that's where it's on the gray fuzzy side. There's autograph signing stuff, but like if you're a tennis player, before you couldn't host a tennis academy, so you couldn't have like go help high school players get better at tennis and use your name. Like they wouldn't let you do that, but now you can. So like those sorts of things are great for gymnasts, golfers, tennis. People that are running camps for kids, they can now essentially sell their name as a college athlete, come get tennis lessons or golf lessons from me. The donor part is where it gets really interesting. It's the NCAA, right? So like, I feel like anything to deal with college athletics, they have such a nuance of what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. It's like the old famous example. You couldn't feed athletes above a certain value. So it was things like, did they have 2 meatballs on the plate or 3 meatballs? Like 3 was a violation and 2 was okay. But it was like that sort of pedantic that would get people in trouble. That's what's happening with the booster part, because you can, in the recruitment portion of it, and I think likely there's a lawsuit coming out soon. So this happened at the University of Miami not too long ago. They were trying to recruit athletes to transfer from another school. And essentially one of the boosters was like, hey, come here and, we'll get you XYZ NIL deal. We'll give you this much money. But that's not allowed. So you can't have a booster saying it, but you could have a coach saying, if you come here, it's likely that we can set you up with, it's about like who's saying it. At the end of the day, the same thing's happening. but the NCAA is so picky about who's allowed to say it and do it and things like that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And you said it's a step in the right direction.
I believe so.
And I believe so as well. Let's you know, when I teach it, I try to give, okay, let's go through the arguments. I'll tell you where I stand, but let's give both sides. So what do you think were either the best, well, why don't we say both the best and the most prominent defenses for not being able to pay college athletes? I mean, the common defense that I don't think was a very good one is you're already getting a scholarship. So therefore you don't need to be paid, which is actually true at some schools, but it's not true at others. Susquehanna, there aren't academic scholarships.
So it's not true. It's not always true, right? Exactly. So there are a handful of sports, so basketball, football, and there's a couple other sports that have full scholarships, but there's a lot of athletes only get partial scholarships.
Sure.
So they may only be getting a tenth of a scholarship, a quarter of a scholarship, a fifth. And so like those are the sorts of things where, you know, if I were a student going to school on a partial academic scholarship, I could get a job and work and make money and pay for the rest of my school. But, you know, previous to NIL, you had these, like, I mean, I'll pick your gymnast as a perfect example. A gymnast wouldn't have had a full scholar. They might have, but there would have been somebody who has like a half scholarship, and then they're still having to cover that other half. But we were basically saying, no, you can't go make money off of what you're good at. Like, you're a gymnast, you can run gym camps, but like, no, you got to go work at Subway. And like that's where it made me uncomfortable. You know, we let students do it. If you got a full academic ride at a university, we don't prohibit you from going out and getting an internship in the summer and saying, you know, you are this elite scholar from a university. We let you advertise your affiliation with the university regularly as a student, even if you're on an academic scholarship. Yeah. So like that was always my sort of take. I would say the argument against it, and I would say the best argument against paying athletes that I would say is they have access to more resources that other students don't. So I would say it's the implicit benefits that they get. So they have access to, you know, personalized gyms that are much better than the other gyms on campus. They have specialized tutoring centers. You know, they're getting travel accommodation, like they're getting non-pecuniary benefits.
They're already getting benefits, and it would just exacerbate the college student inequality.
To me, that would probably be the biggest one, right? They get kind of specialized attention from advisors, trainers. All right, like a normal student doesn't have a personal trainer to help them manage their diet. You know, they're getting counseling services. A lot of athletics departments have sports psychologists on their rosters.
They're getting tutoring services, sometimes legit tutoring, and of course we've heard the scandals of not so legit tutoring. But yeah,
so I would say, you know, they're getting benefits that a lot of other students aren't from an purely academic standpoint.
That's the best. Yeah,
that's my best argument against paying them, but I'm on the side of paying them.
I think the best one that I heard, and once again, I didn't. It caused me to think a little bit, at least, which is, you know, if it's a good argument against. It was actually by former president. I'll give a shout out to Jay Lemons at Susquehanna University, who once was the head of the NCAA. So you could imagine where he stood on all of this. He had to toe the line, and but he mentioned, we already have sports where people are paid. The NCAA is premier level sports where people aren't paid, and if you start to pay, you change the dynamic of that. And once again, I don't think it caused me to think. I hadn't thought about it that way. It was, but that was an argument that was kind of tough to counter when you think about that. I mean, I would, and I can, and I think we will in about 1 minute when we start to argue why we think it's okay. But I thought that was an intriguing one. So why then? So what are the drawbacks of restricting college athletes to be paid? I mean, we talked about some of if you're on a partial scholarship, what are some of the other drawbacks that you see in this?
I think about those partial scholarships. I think about, right, somebody, you know, you're going to school. there are cheap schools and then there's not cheap schools, right? Like we always have this argument about, you know, how much does like a real liberal arts college make you pay, right? The sticker price versus what you know, real cost of attendance. But I look at some of these state schools, and I mean, there's a lot of athletes who realistically wouldn't qualify for an academic scholarship. But then you're asking them to pay tens of thousands of dollars. I think beyond the cost part, I would say the second biggest drawback is the amount of potential injuries that these people are potentially going to have. I think is worth.
And they're not being compensated.
And they're not being compensated. And there's a very good chance you can get injured and then not have your scholarship renewed. I mean, we see it especially in football a lot, right? We see the people who are just paralyzed neck down. They are paid, and I mean, a few $1,000s a month is not going to necessarily make that better. But I think it helps. I think it sends a message that like there is funding for what you're doing. You're not just like you're not just putting yourself on the line for nothing. So especially when I think about, people in tennis and in golf, I think about those when we typically don't think, oh, you're not going to get injured, but like you can get hit with a golf ball. Like there's people get injured all the time.
Well, and repetitive stress injury, tear out blow out a knee or whatever. And
I'm not sure that the money's going to make up for whatever.
No, I wouldn't. But I mean, if you hurt yourself, definitely.
But some of these people are paying money to go to school, and then they get injured. Like it's like a double whammy for those people.
For me, I mean, there's one key thing is just I'm generally pretty libertarian at heart, and if a school, and this is beyond NIL, but just thinking about paying athletes, if a school was willing to pay somebody because they thought this athlete would bring in revenue for the program, and the athlete was willing to take it, I don't want a government saying no to that. So in some ways, it's like the freedom aspect of it.
Yeah.
That's one issue I had, and then two related to that. If you restrict it, it causes a lot of weird side effects. I always would cover, and I'm curious what your notes would have covered, that when we covered when athletes couldn't be paid at all, what types of side effects would you expect to see? So imagine, okay, we have a market, and the market would indicate that a first round NFL draft pick might be worth $500,000 per year to a program, and they can't pay them money. So what else can they do to try to recruit? They have to try to pay them in some other way.
You're going to make me look up my slides, so I'm gonna let me look up my slides for price ceilings, and that way I can have the list of the predictable side effects of price ceiling. So the obvious one, right, is black markets, and that's what happened pre-NIL, and I think that's why the NCAA stepped in and said, "Fine, start paying them. It's fine." Right, so black market, like people were getting paid. Athletes have always been getting paid under the table at different universities. This just at least brings some of it up to the top. So at least in my class, when paying athletes was illegal back a decade ago, I used to show them the ESPN 30 for 30 episode. Did you ever see Pony Excess?
Pony Express, but it would be, but I haven't seen it.
No, this one's called Pony Excess.
Oh, about the Pony
Express. So it's Pony Excess about the Pony Express.
About SMU. I know about the SMU story. I might have seen it, but not 100% with Eric Dickerson and Craig James and all of those.
It's worth purchasing. Okay. That's gonna be my pop culture one later. Okay. You can buy it on YouTube. I think it's like $5 to own it or something like that. Or maybe it's $3. It's cheap. So good.
Okay. I'll have to check it out.
It's basically about SMU in the 1980s and like how they got caught and all that sort of stuff. So black markets. So this will be good. We can kind of mix this with other stuff. So inefficiently low quantity is the number one predictable side effect.
Well, there's that. There's plenty of athletes who will play though.
So I mean, I guess you could essentially argue that if you're paying athletes, yes, you're definitely going to, like, the top ones are obviously worth it, but maybe you don't bring on as many walk-ons or practice squad players.
It could be.
Because they're not actually on the field during game day.
So my thought process, and maybe you can tell me if I've been teaching my students wrong for, 15 years before when I was doing this. I would have the thought process. So if you're a school and you want to recruit the top athletes and you are not allowed to pay them, but you still want to recruit them. So you have to, what can you offer them instead? Well, if it's the case that you cannot give them money, you need to try to give these top athletes value in return. And what is the value? Would be world-class coaching, right?
Mhm.
You know, if an
Yeah.
athlete's coming to you, they want to come to go to the pros.
Mhm.
And therefore I would expect you would see artificially high coaches' salaries in a market where you can't pay players.
Absolutely.
And so we would hear, and we're at colleges, and I'm at a Division 3, so it's not the same. But you know, I'm at a university, and you know, anything with a Division 1, of course, the highest paid person on the campus usually isn't the university president. It's either the football or the basketball coach.
Mhm. Unless they have a med school, and then maybe there's a chance
Maybe.
it's one of the doctors. But yeah, no, you basically, all that excess rent, if it can't go to the players, it goes into the facilities. But
Correct. That's another one, right?
Yeah,
like
right. Like you can only have
class facilities. Yep.
But you can't update it every year. So like, right, like fine, you dump a bunch of money, you build slides and pools and all sorts of stuff. But then like eventually you got to spend it on something, and they tend to spend it on coaches.
Yes. Which to me will be an interesting thing with NIL coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there will be a longer equilibrium. But let's say you're a school that's a top, maybe like top 40 type caliber school, not like the number one, but you know, pretty good school, not an Alabama or
perhaps a Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech might be a good thing. Good one. I'm thinking Penn State just made a run in basketball. So I'm thinking Penn State basketball. And they made the tournament. Would we expect their coaches at these schools to be paid a bit less? Because donors will stop shoveling quite as much into the programs, and they'll shovel a little bit more towards funding NIL deals. To me, it makes a little bit of sense, especially basketball. Would you rather spend $6 million on a coach, or would you rather spend $1 million on a coach and $100 million on 5 different players if you could just pay them outright?
Yeah,
I don't know, but in theory, the coaches' salaries were inflated, and they should fall in the next decade, at least fall relative to what they would have been.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that, and especially, I would be really curious which coach will be the first coach to give up some of their salary to get a player. Right, you think about somebody who's if you're a coach making $3 million, and you can give up $500,000 to secure a number 1 draft pick. Would you give up $500,000 to help yourself win a championship? The answer would be no if you only make $500,000. But if you're one of those coaches that's making $5 million, $6 million a year every year, and you live in the middle of Pennsylvania, your cost of living's not that high. That's where I'd be really curious. Is like I think you're right. I think long term, I think you'll see some of that donor money start to switch, especially as universities start to help facilitate the NIL stuff. Sure. I think it makes it way easier for donors to put money towards that sort of space. I could see it. I could definitely see coaches' salaries coming down for sure.
So it'll be interesting to see, but overall, I think it's the right move. Largely, as a general rule, if something interferes in free markets, I think I have an issue with kind of the freedom of people doing what they want to do, but also there tends to be just some negative side effects. Yeah. And so there's an opportunity. I'm very happy about the move, but it's also fascinating.
There's a cool opportunity cost example too. So those are people who have teams with great players. You likely will have great teams for longer than what you're used to.
Correct.
Because if you're getting paid, you no longer have that incentive to jump immediately up to the pros or to, especially when I think about basketball stuff, right? Like going over to Europe and playing basketball, like play another year and get paid here. I'm really curious how that's going to change the dynamics of essentially team quality, where you now actually get a player who will stick it out their whole time because they don't feel the need to go to move up.
Sure.
And so what that'll do for things like, overall, that realistically, all that does, it just makes the overall, the pro product better too, because now your best players now have another year of experience before they make their way up.
Yeah, suppose you were going to be the 15th pick in the NBA, right? That's millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. But if you can get an NIL deal worth $1.5 million, and then maybe you take out a little bit of insurance, maybe you take $50,000 to $100,000 of that to do insurance, where if you get hurt, you get a buyout. All of a sudden, okay, maybe you're costing yourself a little bit, but you like college ranks, and maybe you're not costing yourself much because maybe the next year you come in and you're the 4th overall pick. And but it's tough to turn that down, that guaranteed money. right away, especially.
So what I would like to see change that I think would help. It would. I really do think it would help everyone involved, and not just like a help you at your university. I really wish athletes were allowed to have agents, college athletes. And I understand like that was part of that line of like, oh, you're hiring an agent, you're now a professional. I believe they need an advisor who is responsible to the player and not to the university. Because right now, athletes have advisors coming from universities, but the universities have an incentive to keep that player another year, and that may not necessarily be the best thing for somebody financially. And so it's frustrating to think of like that question about like, my 15th pick or a 4th pick, having an agent who can help you with that to say like, here's what your contract's expected to be. Here are teams that are interested. I believe that I always take it back to a fairness idea between academics and athletics. As a student, if I was a student and I wanted to hire a personal tutor to help me manage grad school and where I was going, that's perfectly legal. There's nothing that that person's leaving eventually and all sorts of stuff. We have academic coaches, perfectly fine. But when it comes to college athletes, we don't let them have an agent, and I think that's wrong. Just because they don't have somebody who's personally tied to their success, not the school success.
That's a good point. I 100% agree. I think that would be a valuable addition. So, anything else to say on NIL before we go to the pop culture of the week?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to add one little comment because I think there might be people listening saying, "Well, how is it fair to value different athletes across different sports?" And so I think it's at least worth bringing up that I do not think that is necessarily a problem. We do this in all sorts of different avenues all the time. So I remember when I used to teach this was always one of the big complaints against paying athletes. They said, well, how do you decide what a football player is worth versus I'll use gymnast or a golfer's worth? Football brings in revenue, but golf doesn't. So like, it's not fair, that sort of thing. And my argument was always, you know what though? I bring in revenue for the university. Students come and I teach them. The janitor doesn't bring in revenue, but they're an integral part of the experience of being here. And just because somebody doesn't directly generate revenue doesn't mean that they're not worth something to the university. So my one caveat, and I always try to prepare myself when talking about paying athletes, is you can pay someone even if you don't directly see revenue from that person. I think that's perfectly fine that we pay plenty of people in all sorts of industries. We pay them as support for the operation.
And I think to paying them differently, the argument I would take was there are markets that pay people differently. Mm-hmm. And you're in college and you're choosing a major, and those majors pay differently. And we chose economics, which is higher than some fields, but it's a whole lot lower than, say, engineering, right? If you want to go into academia.
And they're being bid on anyway with scholarships, right? We'll give you a half scholarship, we'll give you a quarter scholarship. The players on the team currently don't all have the same scholarship as it is. Paying them differently, I think, is perfectly okay. And I think realistically, this is where I really believe in the transparency of information is those salaries should be publicly available, just like if you're going to make professor salaries available, you should make athlete salaries available as well. So then an athlete knows, hey, look, they don't pay, if I'm a softball player, they don't pay their softball players as much as this other place is paying them. And so I think that sort of bargaining negotiation should happen. It happens on scholarships already. I'm fine with people getting paid different amounts for the sports that they play. Yep. I like to drop that in there because I know people always that's a fighting point for a lot of don't pay them people.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And for those, we're clearly on the same side on this issue. So if you disagree with us, shoot a line in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And love a good argument in good faith, right? If somebody's saying you're an idiot, XYZ, okay, no, but
just remember,
right? Say, hey, I think you're wrong, and this is what I think. Yeah, please let us know.
If you're watching the NCAA tournament, just think of all the people that are watching, all the advertisers that are spending money, all the eyeballs that are on there. And those athletes are, for the most part, getting a scholarship. They are getting fed. They have a dining plan that is much more generous than before. and some of them maybe can sell their name, but they're not going to get nearly as much money if they were allowed to do other things. So
open market, correct?
If there's an open market, right? They'd get paid a lot more, and I don't think it would change the structure of the game, not at all. There's people who love minor league baseball, and there's people who love Major League Baseball. You know who doesn't get anything is high school football players, and you don't see people just driving all over the country to watch high school football. There's different levels, and it's different experiences. I don't think paying them changes the meaning of the game at all.
Yeah. You'd mentioned your pop culture reference. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on?
Yeah, I'll do mine first. Mine's an easy one since I mentioned it earlier. So ESPN 30 for 30. We've talked about it previously, I think, when we talked about a different topic. We talked about broke. I'm trying to think of what.
Yep. I don't remember when we talked. What was the context for talking about broke?
Maybe it was sports econ. Maybe we were just talking about sports econ. So it's ESPN 30 for 30. They did a whole series of just like really cool sports events in history. One of the episodes is called Pony Excess. It's about the Pony Express, the Southern Methodist cheating scandal, where they basically shut down the program for like a year and a half. Absolutely fascinating kind of look at what happened, what was going on, what are the repercussions of it. Completely rocked that program for years. And so I would imagine that Abdullah and Darshik have that listed in their paper on teaching econ using 30 for 30. Sure. I would imagine that I'm fairly confident they do. But that's my pop culture one. It's just fascinating. It's got tons of really good stuff about markets and exchange and really good sports and econ.
I have one. I'm going to move away from sports, but it is timely. So season 4 of Succession is going to be dropping Sunday from when this episode drops. So it drops on Sunday, March 26th. And the first few seasons of it have so many good game theory examples. So I actually have a couple things that Foundation for Economic Education ran, going through a couple economic examples, but there's some game theory examples. But I'm excited to watch that, largely just to see what new is in there. But just from a classic prisoner's dilemma to something that's not often talked. I mean, in principles of economics, you don't have enough time to get into this. But when I teach the upper level game theory, it's not like it's a topic, but throughout the class, several times we'll talk about how spite matters. Okay. And when you're thinking about
spite today,
when you're thinking about the payoffs of something, it's not always just the money, right? It could be the value of spite and backward induction, beginning with the end in mind. So, and bargaining, and there's so many good things. So it's a great series. I have a couple YouTube videos talking through a couple of those, and then the fee articles, and we can put those in the description. But Succession, it's a pretty fascinating series. If you haven't started it, start with the beginning. And if you're like me, it took about 3 or 4, and you were almost ready to give up, and then all of a sudden you couldn't stop watching. But I think it's pretty.
It's on HBO, right?
HBO.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. Well, any closing thoughts?
No, but I will tell you. This was the strangest Kolsch I've ever had, but it's pretty good. I think some of this is it's a weird Kolsch because I got a Kolsch out of a bottle, and maybe that's all it is. But it's been good. The Hazy Bones Hazy IPA is clearly pretty good because mine is gone. So to finish this real fast, then.
Yeah. Well, great chatting with you, Jadrian. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Love it if you could leave us a comment, share with a friend if you like it.
Tell us what you would like to hear next. We have lots of ideas, but we are running out of ideas that we think you want to hear. So if you tell us what you want, we will make an episode especially for you, and we will talk about you the entire time. Otherwise, you're just going to hear Matt and I talk about what we want to talk about.
That is true. So, well, Jadrian, until the next time.
Awesome. Cheers.